Let's talk a little bit about cable, satellite, and internet television, something that many of you are probably very familiar with, but you might not have ever taken the time to sit down and think about the differences in this set of television programming versus the broadcast programming, which was also included in this unit. And I want to start off by talking about some of the differences between broadcast and cable and satellite content. Number one, there's a big difference in the equipment needed. In order to get broadcast stations, all you need is a television with an antenna. If you want to access cable or satellite, you need a cable box, you need a satellite. In most cases, for satellite television for sure, for cable, you need at least a cable box at your house so that you can watch it on your phone or tablet or another mobile device, but you do need that equipment. There's also a cost involved. Broadcast is free, aside from the cost of the television and the antenna, but if you want cable or satellite programming, you will pay for it, a considerable amount in a lot of cases. And the content differs too. We see a slightly different approach to developing content for cable as opposed to developing content for broadcast. Broadcast television content targets what a lot of critics call the lowest common denominator in society. That means you want content on broadcast networks that has a massive appeal. You want your content on broadcast to appeal to as many people as possible because that's what brings in your advertising dollars. Cable and satellite stations, on the other hand, have a slightly different business model. They cater to niche markets, and what that means is that they are not targeting a massive audience. Yes, they still want advertising dollars. Yes, they want lots of eyes watching their programming, but they are targeting very, very specific markets. Think about this. It makes sense if you think about the channels. We've got the History Channel. We've got a History Channel that targets people who are very interested in history. You have Animal Planet. People who love animals are going to be watching shows on Animal Planet. We've got Lifetime Movie Network for people who really want an emotionally charged movie every now and then. We've got BET, which targets a hip-hop and urban music audience. We've got CMT, which targets the country music audience. We've got MTV, which doesn't care about music anymore, sadly. So we've got a variety of different audiences. Every audience has a particular channel that probably works for them. So we've got a big difference here in the type of programming, the type of content. So let's move on and talk a little bit about how our favorite congressional act, the Telecommunications Act of 1996, impacted the cable and satellite industry. It had implications for radio, had implications for television, and of course it has implications for cable. This act actually made it possible for cable companies to provide phone services to their consumers. And this also enabled content to be transmitted via fiber optic cable, which means we have way faster internets and better phone service too. Now, whether this helped or hurt the cable and satellite industry, my opinion is that it actually helped the industry because it allowed cable packages or cable companies to start bundling their content and their services together, making it profitable for the cable industry. Not necessarily at the benefit of consumers. That's less competition and could have been, we deal with terrible customer service a lot of times with these cable industries. So we see both sides of it. But at any rate, the Telecommunications Act of 1996 is the piece of legislation that allowed cable companies to start also bundling internet and phone services into your cable bill. Now, cable and satellite had very humble beginnings, began in the 1950s really as a way to help rural residents get television, which is kind of ironic to me because I grew up in a very rural area. In fact, my house was in such a rural, remote area that we couldn't get cable because the cable did not extend out to my house. But in the 50s, it began as a way to help rural residents who didn't even have really access to broadcast television, so it was a very important service. But by 1987, about half of the homes in the country had cable, and there are a few kind of anchor networks that helped that out. CNN was the very first 24-hour news network. Wow, back in the day when we just had one. ESPN started carrying NFL games, which was huge. And of course, MTV sparked a cultural revolution. And so we've got here three different unique niche audiences right there. We've got people who are news junkies, we've got people who love sports, and maybe a younger audience who just is really into music and culture. So those are really the three networks that helped anchor cable into the fabric of American culture. Now, cable really embraced mobile media whenever we started to see the proliferation of cell phones and different mobile devices and the ability to stream and watch content on multiple screens. Cable was like, sure, sign us up. Let's offer our subscribers a way to watch content on many devices. Potential problem with this: program producers want more money for this service, and cable doesn't want to pay them for this service. Cable companies feel like their subscribers should be able to watch whatever content they've subscribed to on whatever screen they want, whenever they want. Whether or not you agree is a really interesting point of consideration. You'll want to think about that as you move forward, whether that's legal, whether that's okay. I see both sides of it. From the cable company's perspective, they want to get the most out of their subscription fees for their consumers. They also don't want to lose any money and pay anybody that they don't have to. But from a program perspective, if you're developing content, previously you just developed content for one screen only. You were only developing content to be watched on a television. Now if you've got a television show, it might be watched on a television, might be watched on a laptop, might be watched on somebody's phone, might be watched on YouTube later. So you do need to take that into consideration if you're a content producer. It does change the game a little bit. Last, let's talk a little bit about what people are doing now in cutting the cord. The book actually has some pretty outdated information on this, so I need to update it. Cutting the cord on cable is actually a legitimate thing. It's a trend now. Since 2010, your book was published in 2012, 3.8 million homes have either refused cable or eliminated cable and satellite altogether. 40% of homes today have broadband streaming, and I think that number is going to continue to increase. It's very convenient. My home certainly does broadband streaming, and we love it. Why people still subscribe to cable? They feel like they get content they wouldn't get elsewhere. Those of you who maybe have already cut the cord in your own homes, either for cost purposes or just because you want a change, fully understand that you can get a lot of wonderful content on Netflix and on Hulu and Amazon Prime. Some of my favorite shows are actually the ones that have come up on Netflix lately, like Stranger Things. I've got kind of addicted over the summer. And those are examples of content providers that are providing a service much cheaper than your cable service. Cable is really going to struggle, I think, in the coming years to maintain their foothold in the market. There will always be a market for cable, but I think it's going to be a little bit more challenging for them. They're going to have to get creative and figure out what to do about all these homes that are cutting the cord and completely getting rid of cable services. All right, quick overview of cable and satellite and internet television. Thank you so much for listening.